All right, we'll move straight on. I'd like to welcome Chris Brady up to the stage. Chris is with the Northern Land Council. Is Chris, where's Chris? Oh, there he is, okay. And Chris will be presenting today on the cultural reconnection with the Ranger project area. So please welcome Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is actually a joint presentation between the Northern Land Council, Kunjatmi Aboriginal Corporation and Kakadu Native Plants, and we've pre-recorded it so I don't have to do any public speaking, and also so you can hear from each of these organisations. And just to let you know, this is part one of the presentation that we put together for this conference, and it's giving some background to why we think cultural reconnection is such an important part of rehabilitating mine sites. And I just want to invite you to attend the second part, which is going to be at 4:20 this afternoon in the Litchfield room, where we're showing a short film on the activities of the Ranger Cultural Reconnection Committee, which has been established by Mirarr traditional owners. So if we can show the film.
Thanks everyone. My name is Justin O'Brien. I'm the CEO of the Kunjatmi Aboriginal Corporation. I've worked for the Mirarr traditional owners here in Jabiru and Kakadu for about 20 years. The Mirarr are the traditional owners of the Ranger project area and the Jabiluka mineral lease, as well as the township of Jabiru and parts of Kakadu National Park and Western Arnhem Land. This corporation was established in 1995 and immediately found itself pitted in a David and Goliath struggle against mining at Jabiluka, but more of that later. My job today is a brief one. It's just to introduce Chris Brady and Peter Christopherson. Chris Brady is an environmental scientist who spent the better part of 20 years in the Northern Territory, working mostly with and for Aboriginal people, and today he works with the Northern Land Council. Peter Christopherson of Kakadu Native Plant Supplies is an Aboriginal contractor with extensive Indigenous land management experience in the top end, and he's intimately associated for many years with our attempts here at Kunjatmi to ensure that the rehabilitation of the Ranger mine is effective, both environmentally and culturally, within the measly 5 years that it's currently provided for. That is quite the task. The disturbed area of the mine, and you can see that image here, is large. You'll see from this tailing storage facility, that is 1 kilometre in width. We have billions of litres of contaminated water, millions of tonnes of waste rock, upstream of internationally protected wetlands and Aboriginal communities. This mine was originally established by overriding local Aboriginal opposition under Commonwealth ownership. 50% of the mine was then owned by the Commonwealth. It went on to operate for 40 years, producing 130,000 tonnes of uranium oxide. Mining ended in 2012 and milling just ceased last month. We're in the rehab phase now. The Aboriginal Land Rights Act of the Northern Territory was a double-edged sword for people here. It delivered land rights and with that a veto over any development on any land granted, except in the case of the Ranger uranium mine, where the veto was especially carved out because of the Commonwealth ownership of the asset. Ranger is totally surrounded by the World Heritage listed Kakadu National Park. That's Australia's largest national park, one of only 32 worldwide listed for both natural and cultural values, and the site of Australia's oldest human occupation site at Mudgeeraba, at least 65,000 years of occupation there. Now in August 2000, Rio Tinto acquired seeking to gain control of iron ore assets in the Pilbara. They gained a majority stake in ERA. At the time, we expected to have mercenaries overrun us and further mining pushed upon us, like in Bougainville. Instead, we found, after first trying to sell ERA, Rio Tinto admirably deal with the nightmarish history of Ranger by ultimately entering into an agreement with the Mirarr and the Northern Land Councils to never mine Jabiluka, the site of the protest, without written consent. Now that's true, free, prior and informed consent, a high watermark in relations between the resource sector and Aboriginal people worldwide. That was entered into in February 2005. Today, the major test for Rio is to address the challenge of rehabilitation, and such that this area can be included into the World Heritage List of Kakadu. After the travesty of the destruction of the Juukan Cave in the Pilbara, the world is watching Rio Tinto, of course. Now, Chris and Peter here are pivotal in working with the traditional owners to position the TOs in regard to rehab and restoring the country back to them. They're spearheading a project with Mirarr to capture the values that traditional owners wish to see restored at Ranger and articulating those values in a way recognisable to Western environmental science, ways that an engineer can plan for. It's a remarkably innovative and practical way of giving traditional ecological knowledge practical effect. So this work has to inform the closure criteria against which Rio Tinto's rehabilitation will be measured. We aim for that, what we call cultural closure criteria, to become a enforceable part of the regulatory system. We're not quite there yet. The state and the mining companies still privilege Western environmental science values at the expense and over and above traditional values. Cultural considerations should be included alongside other criteria for closure, such as water, landform, revegetation and radiation. Chris will now address some of the background and challenges to this type of cross-cultural work, highlighting the importance of cultural values in successful rehabilitation. And after that, Peter will provide you with an insight into a proposed practical application of those values as part of the mine's rehabilitation. At that, I'll hand over to Chris Brady. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Justin. I'm going to provide some background to some proposed work to facilitate cultural reconnection in the Ranger project area, where uranium production ceased just a few weeks ago. First, I want to talk a little about mine closure and land rights in the Northern Territory. Mining inevitably leads to change, creation of hills, voids, changes to water, and change is really important to Aboriginal people, whose tradition teaches a created and interconnected landscape. In recognition of negative impacts from former mines, the Northern Territory government established a legacy mine unit in 2013, estimating there is a liability of over $1 billion for remediation of old mine sites. This does not include the cost of loss of productivity and values. Note this photo here is not of snow. This is a mine site in the tropics near Pine Creek in the Northern Territory. Among the most notorious of the legacy mine sites is the Red Bank copper mine. Poor construction and planning has resulted in the release of polluted water for decades. The Northern Territory government held a bond of just $150,000. In 2013, the NT Mines Minister promised traditional owners remediation of this site was a priority. They are still waiting for action. Traditional owner Keith Rory said, "We have grandchildren and kids coming up. We need a future. The mine needs to do the right thing by the people. Our young kids need to get on country, hunting and fishing. They can't be frightened of contamination. We need to make sure that the country is safe for our young people to go back to work, to hunt, to live on the land of their grandfathers and grandmothers." It's enough about legacy mines. The point I'm trying to make is that the NT has not dealt well with mine closure. As half the land in the Northern Territory belongs to Aboriginal people, the impacts of the legacy often falls to them. Any attempt at mine rehabilitation should consider how Aboriginal people view and use the land. In 1998, I was fortunate to receive a scholarship to undertake a study called Birds as Indicators of Rehabilitation Success at Gove mine sites. The Gove mine sites are in Eastern Arnhem Land, an important place in the history of land rights in Australia. I took a very scientific approach to the study, making detailed counts and measures across replicate sites. I found as many birds and similar species richness between old rehabilitation areas and the surrounding bush, although the species mix differed. This could be considered functional restoration, a success. I asked an Aboriginal lady what she thought. She told me the area is where stringy barks camp. The rehabilitation had stringy barks, but it also had other eucalypts. As an ecologist, these were local species and they provide ecosystem services. To this particular lady, mixing up of species was of great concern. it could mix up the dreaming of the people responsible for the place, leading to social dysfunction, which she witnessed in the community. So one's cultural perception is crucial to what is a significant impact and what would be seen as rehabilitation success. Mirarr traditional owner, Yvonne Margarula's father, made it clear when mining at Ranger was proposed that he was worried about potential impacts disturbance of dangerous sacred places that he was obliged to protect could have on other people, that it could lead to disaster. In April 2011, following the earthquake, tsunami and nuclear disaster in Japan, Yvonne wrote to the UN Secretary General to express her sorrow for the impacts radiation was having on the lives of Japanese people. This photo is of a meeting that Yvonne had with one of those Japanese people, a farmer who lost all his cattle in the disaster, who subsequently came and visited Jabiru. The disturbance of sacred places in Australia causing a disaster in Japan is probably not how an objective scientist would view the Fukushima disaster, but it is a totally logical interpretation within the worldview of the Mirarr. With 40 years of mining at Ranger, there has been total destruction of the pre-mining landscape. Jokmara Billabong is forever lost. This is just upstream from world-renowned wetlands where Aboriginal people have their homes and hunting grounds. Mudgeonberry Billabong, you can see in the centre of the slide here, is the largest outstation of Aboriginal people in Kakadu. Now, within the 5-year legislated period for rehabilitation, there remains significant uncertainty, such as the level of contamination that will remain in and beneath the ground. Is there sufficient funds? And what will happen when the legislative period for closure expires? However, there is a lot of positive progress being made towards the closure of the mine. ERA have funded work for traditional owners to develop cultural closure criteria, perhaps new for the mining industry. The criteria consider the binning worldview and land use, the desires of people to again use the land for hunting and gathering, recreation, land management, and ritual. The criteria are an attempt to put these desires in terms scientists, engineers, and regulators can use in planning and assessing the rehabilitation. I now invite Peter, an Aboriginal man with connection to West Arnhem Land in Kakadu, to talk about a proposed plan to include Indigenous knowledge and perspective into rehabilitation design that we believe will facilitate Aboriginal people reconnecting with this landscape where their family have lived for millennia. I'll hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So really, my job is to try and facilitate how Aboriginal people can work with the Western Science group and look at ways in which we can achieve practical outcomes to achieve everybody's objectives. And so going back on what Chris mentioned about how we see the world around us, we're interrelated with all plants, animals, places, ceremony, rocks, moon, sun. We all have a relationship and a place within the environment. So basically on the first photo, we can see up on the top left, these are natural outcrops, and these natural outcrops provide some resistance to fire. And often you find quite unique flora existing there, which then attract quite unique animals. The next picture down is of a small microbat. And so over time, the idea is that we can give Aboriginal people an opportunity to look at country and how they'd like to perhaps integrate their knowledge into the final rehab. So I went around the park and just took a few photos of outlying rocky outcrops, just to give Aboriginal people or the Mirarr an opportunity to revitalise some of their knowledge of these areas. And basically, we would look at what animal they want to see or what animal would exist in those areas, and then start to drill down on what plants we would need to put in there to facilitate those animals coming back. But not only that, understanding the relationship between each plant selected. So the kinship relationship between the plant the animal, ourself, and the place. So just the three photos there depict three different environments. We have a floodplain system on the left, again, quite unique plants existing there. We have a monsoon thicket in the middle and an open woodland area on the right. And each of these can play a role in the different areas of the mine rehab. Drier woodland areas, more riparian or monsoonal thickets, and perhaps a drier, wetter area. And the rock size can vary, so quite large rock islands, lower flat ground or lower slopes. Scattered rocks can be arranged on ridge lines and they can provide erosion control to those areas. Also, there's going to be some quite large runoff occur. I don't know where they are, but eventually we could use the hardening of rocks to curb and manage runoff. So with this slide at the bottom but not shown, there's a very sacred site known as Gytpy Gytpy, and it refers to the resting place of the King Brown. That story of his travels emanates through northwards, through that mine area. And basically what I looked at was how do we continue with that story by using rock formations to, one, cater for traditional plantings and shelter for small mammals and birds and so forth, but also provide that link with the outside area of the mine through and keep those travels going through to the other side. I guess trying to provide continuity between the outside and the inside of that mine, both for a story, for the sacred story of that place, for the plants and animals, and for people as well. So the benefits here is that we would give meaningful engagement to the mirror in designing the landform. We would really look at reconnecting people with country, which has been a difficult aspect throughout the 40 years. People have stayed away and not participated in any of that work, and now it gives them an opportunity to participate there. Really about developing niche planting areas that cater for specific animals, plants, and people. I guess the main issue here is that over time, these niche habitats will start to develop and hopefully bringing back the different fauna that the traditional owners would expect. And I guess this would form part of the long-term monitoring program. And the last point here is that most landforms that I've visited of mine sites that have been re-established have been featureless. And again, this provides some feature that people can relate to. Thank you.